Protecting personal information within the court file. Hi, I'm Darren Findling of the Probate Pro, and we're going to examine a recent change to the rules as it relates to probate court filings. Now, this form that we're going to go over, the Protected Personal Identifying Information Form, which is MC 97, was revised and went into effect July 1 of 2021, but has been delayed in its mandatory requirement until the end of 2021. Now, this form finally catches up to an administrative order and a recent change to the Michigan court rule. That court rule was 1.109, and the rule specifically required that a filer could not file a social security number within a court filing, and that doing so was a violation of law and could subject that person to particular sanctions. Now, that administrative order was then followed with a court rule. And so now this form finally allows that court rule and administrative order to kind of catch up with the times. Here's why. In most probate court filings, when you file the initial petition, for example, a petition to open a probate estate, a petition for probate, or a petition for guardianship, or a petition for conservatorship, the filer was required on these forms to identify the date of birth, in certain contexts the date of death, as well as the social security number. This very personal information was, of course, public record, because any filings that have occurred within the probate court are public record, which means anybody can access that information. It is free to access. So people could, of course, take that information and use it for bad purposes. In addition, the person that is the subject of the petition had essentially all of their information on a public forum for anyone to look at. Really an unfair circumstance. So the dilemma here was that there was this administrative order that said you couldn't do it, but all the forms required that the petitioner identify the date of birth, date of death, and social security number. Now, some of them were last four digits of social security numbers, but nonetheless, this very personal information was for anyone to see and anyone to read. So the court finally responds many years later with MC 97. This is the court form as reflected by the yellow arrow in the bottom left corner. Now, the form was revised, and it was supposed to go into effect July 1 of 2021, but the mandatory requirement of its use has been delayed to December 31st of 21, primarily because of the pandemic. Let's work our way through this form. Now, understand that this form MC97 is really a form that is used in addition to other filings. So it may be in the probate court, circuit court, or district court, and the form itself is generally accompanied with other petition documents or pleadings that have been filed with the court. So we're going to use this form and kind of work our way through the form, understanding that it is a form in addition to other filings that would have occurred with the court. In the top left corner, in the blue rectangle, is identification of the county. In the top right corner is the case number and the corresponding judge that has been assigned to the case. As we work our way through the form, the next part of the form that we're going to cover relates to, again, court address information. And if there's a plaintiff or defendant, if this were used in a circuit court context, you'd put that information there. But in the probate court context, it's in the matter of. So in the matter of would be the estate of John Doe, for example. Now that could be a guardianship, conservatorship, trust, deceased estate. Then it provides this language. If this form is filed on or after January 1 of 2022, it will be maintained in a non-public document. Now, the reason they use this language about it being a non-public document, because it is being stored at the court, which is a public forum, but it's going to be stored as a non-public document. So what that means is that if you were to subpoena the court forms or access it by public access, this form would not be available to be viewed. Under the court rule, it is a non-public document compared to a public document. Now, it says because the information within it is personal identifying information, they use the short term PII, it will be protected under the court rule. We reference MCR 1.109, and it goes into effect and will be a mandatory requirement as of January 1, 2022. Now, the form will be used when there's a defendant, respondent, or decedent, plaintiff, petitioner, or individual. There's a form in those contexts if you're a plaintiff, petitioner, or individual, which is MC 97A. 97A and 97 look very similar. There's just a few different pieces of information depending on whether you're entering the date of birth, interested parties' dates of birth. For example, in a petition for deceased estate, there is a requirement that you list any minor children of the decedent and their dates of birth. So this is just an example of how these forms slightly differ depending on the context that you're using them: deceased estate, guardianship, conservatorship, and so on. Now, you're only to provide the personal identifying information for your particular case. So if you're filing a document that requires it in the form, you then use this form for identifying the information. So for example, if you're filing a petition for deceased estate, where it says social security number, you'd write MC97, C meaning the word SEE, like reference this form. Where it says date of birth, same thing. You'd reference this form and add that information in there. Now, the next section says, what is this personal identifying information form being used to supplement, and you identify the form. Again, petition for probate, petition for guardianship, and so on. And then it identifies who that person relates to that you're providing the information. So there's no confusion that this person and this social security number match up. Below, again, this is the personal identifying information that you're going to be including here: name, date of birth, social security number or national ID number, driver's license number, passport number, whatever is being required within the court form or court filing that you're using. You're going to use this form to reference the information, and on the primary document, you're just going to reference it. You're going to say view or see MC97 and then file this in conjunction with it. In addition, the bottom, often there's an identification of a financial institution on annual accounts and so on. Here you'd put the financial institution name and number. Because imagine this: if you're in a conservatorship context or a deceased estate and you have filed an inventory, people are listing the name of the financial institution, the social security number, the date of birth, and the account number. You're essentially giving a roadmap or the keys to the account to the bad criminals that are out there. So this form was an attempt to solve and fix that information. Again, it's in a non-public place with a non-form or non-public document space within the courthouse, but nonetheless, it's there. So this form will be utilized quite often in almost all the filings to establish guardianship, conservatorship, deceased estates, as well as trust supervision related matters. At the Probate Pro, we are passionate about everything probate. If you have questions about the protected personal identifying information form or any probate or trust related issue, visit us at theprobatepro.com or call us at 1-833-PROBATE.